Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska. Here he was recently with some members of a convoy, I believe, up in Alaska. Play it.
I do not believe that the federal government, and particularly the President of the United States, has the power to look at American citizens and say, either you get vaccinated or you get fired for your job. No! He doesn't have that power.
Senator Sullivan was up there at a trucker protest in Alaska, and he is with us now. Senator Dan Sullivan, good to have you on, sir.
Hey, Clay, Buck, good to be on the show. Thanks.
Great to have you. So what's going on? I mean, a lot of us stateside and, in the lower 48 in particular, but certainly up in Alaska, I know people are talking about this too, are wondering, is there going to be a trucker protest, a trucker convoy similar to what's happened in Canada? What's going on up in your state in Alaska? Tell us about it.
Well, look, people are very motivated to support not just the truckers, but this whole issue of this illegal, unconstitutional vaccine mandate. I think, the rally that I was at back home over the weekend, this is bringing out people who don't always protest. This is bringing about average Alaskans, average Americans, because people are tired of this. And I will tell you, the one thing that I tried to emphasize in my remarks is a lot of people right now have amnesia. Think about it, you guys. The truckers and other frontline workers during the pandemic 2 years ago, when things were just hitting our country, they were telling everybody, hey, you got to telework. Well, guess what? There's a lot of people in America who couldn't telework. The people who are keeping the shelves in our stores full, the people who are producing oil and gas, the frontline police and first responders, our military. So I was saying, hey, it's not just the truckers who we want to support, but we got to remember these are the people who kept us going during the pandemic, and now they're being forgotten or being told they're going to be fired if they don't get a vaccine. It's outrageous.
What are you hearing, Senator Sullivan? I appreciate you coming on with us. What are you hearing from your constituents about supply chain issues all over Alaska, I would imagine, maybe even more pronounced than in many other parts of the country, given how difficult it can be to ship things and move things around? And what are you hearing about this massive, I feel like, outpouring against COVID restrictions in general? I know Alaska has got a great affinity for freedom. What are your constituents telling you in the state about both those issues?
Well, they're interrelated, and it's a great question because, as you mentioned, we in Alaska are very vulnerable to supply chains, and a lot of what the Canadians say is their policies directly impact us. I was talking to a trucker at that rally who said for months and months he was driving through Canada to deliver supplies to Alaskans. He had actually gotten a vaccination, but now he said, I'm being required to get a booster, and I can't supply the people of Alaska. I mean, literally one of the guys at the rally who I was talking to. So to me, they are very interconnected. But again, I will say that my constituents are just tired of this federal overreach. Here's something that I think was really important, and it hasn't been discussed a lot. When we put together the CARES Act, and look, nobody knew what was really going to happen. That was the first big relief bill. The overriding principle that we put in that bill, Democrats and Republicans, the Trump administration, all of us working together, was if you're a business or an airline or something that's getting federal aid, you actually have to keep your workers. You have to keep them. The whole point of the CARES Act was keeping people together, keeping people working. Joe Biden comes in, you guys, and takes a sledgehammer to that principle and flips it on his head and says to employers, if people don't get vaccinated, you got to go fire the very people who are keeping us safe when there was no vaccine. Think about the illogical nature of that. And so I think the average Alaskan is viewing these mandates as something that, we're just not tired of, but that the federal government has no right to enact. And the one thing I said at the rally that I think a lot of people wanted to hear was that we're actually winning. We are winning. When these unconstitutional and illegal vaccination mandates have been challenged, we've won in almost every court, including the U.S. Supreme Court. And you guys may have seen it. We put forward, I was the lead co-sponsor of a Congressional Review Act resolution. That's a resolution that has the force of law in the Senate. It passed with bipartisan numbers of senators. Democrats voted for it, too, to overturn Biden's illegal mandate. So we're winning, and I think the people are behind us, and I think there's just a weariness here, but also a sense that the government has gotten way out of its lane in terms of its constitutional and legal authorities.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Senator Sullivan. Like me, you met your wife in law school, I believe. You were at Georgetown, and I believe I've got all that correct. I'm curious what you think about the uproar surrounding Ilya Shapiro, who is a Georgetown professor, as an alum, and certainly you're going to be enmeshed in the decision of who the next Supreme Court justice is. What did you think of that fracas, that controversy, and how does it play into the larger context in which a Supreme Court justice will soon be considered on Capitol Hill? You're an alum of Georgetown. I'm curious what you think.
Well, look, what I've been saying on the Supreme Court nominee is that I'm gonna do what I think every senator should do, is meet with the nominee, go over his or her record, and importantly, treat him or her and the office with the respect and dignity that it requires. Okay, this is a very, very important position, no matter who's nominated. But what I'm not going to do is take part in any kind of fiasco circus that you saw with Brett Kavanaugh. Right, that was a low point in my view of how this is supposed to be done, and I don't anticipate on the Republican side any kind of those antics. We're going to be focused on the record and on the judicial philosophy. What I do with every single Supreme Court nominee that I have vetted and met with, I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, but I take it very seriously because, as you guys probably know, there are many federal court decisions that only relate to Alaska, federal laws that only relate to Alaska. And what I do with all the justices or judges who want to be justices and come before me, I try to educate them on those, whether I'm going to vote for them or not. Hey, are you aware of this? Are you aware of that? I also grill them on the Second Amendment. Very, very, very important to my constituents. A lot of judges aren't fully up to speed on the Heller decision. That's the Scalia decision that said for the first time in American history that the Second Amendment is an individual right that is not related to your service in a militia. Gigantic issue for the great state of Alaska and my constituents. So I do it with respect, but also grill them on things that matter to the people I represent, and then get to judicial philosophy. What is your view of your role on the court?
Senator Sullivan, we've only got about
to the way Kavanaugh was treated.
Yeah, it was horrible,
outrageous, and we can't go there again. We shouldn't go there again.
We're speaking to Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska. Sir, just before we let you go, I wanted to know, you were an infantry officer and a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. Thank you for your service. There have been members of the military who have been fired from their jobs, who have been kicked out for the vaccine mandate issue in recent days. What do you think could be done, should be done at the government level? I mean, assuming, let's say, even maybe Republicans take control of the House and the Senate in this midterm. How do we make amends for that? Because I think that's a stain on the honor of this country that we would kick out men and women for not getting a shot that, as we all saw, didn't stop the spread in the first place. What should be done?
Well, look, I'm actually still serving. I'm a colonel in the reserves. I just spent 10 days out on Indo-PACOM theater, part of an exercise operation or exercise Keen Edge, with a bilateral exercise with the Japanese military. So I'm still very involved and on the Armed Services Committee. Look, I think the one thing that has to happen is the exemption process that's going on through the military has to be taken seriously. You know, in the military, you go through and you get all kinds of vaccines when you're first in, when you're going through the boot camp or officer candidate school. I do think it's a little different from the average citizen given that history. But what I've been concerned about right now is up until now, you're reading about services that haven't provided any exemptions for anything. And I think that even for the military, is under the law, and it's something that we need to look hard at with regard to keeping our force ready, lethal, strong, but also making sure they're abiding by the rules that relate to these kind of vaccines.
Senator Sullivan, appreciate you joining us. Keep us updated on the Alaskan truckers joining alongside of the Canadian truckers, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great. Clay, Buck, thanks very much, and I look forward to getting back on the show.
We have the Winter Olympics underway in China right now. A lot of questions about what the world should make of this and what should corporate America do to speak out, given the obvious and extreme human rights abuses underway in the Chinese Communist Party's territory. Well, will we actually have some companies that will speak out? Will they be honest about this? Apparently not, at least in the case of NBC refusing to air an ad that featured Representative Michael Waltz, also a veteran U.S. Army, and Inez Cantor Freedom, I believe, right? This is now official name.
That's correct.
Awesome. Inez Cantor Freedom. We have Michael Waltz, Congressman Waltz of Florida, with us now to talk about what went down here. Congressman, always a pleasure.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
So just tell us, what is the issue here? You want to run an ad saying what, and NBC wouldn't do it? Well, actually,
Yep.
You know what? We actually have the ad. Why don't we play the ad, and then everyone can tell us what happened. Play that ad.
World's greatest athletic showcase. But just outside the show, rape, genocide, slave labor. American companies are drunk on Chinese dollars, entangled with communist dictators committing atrocities and propping up these genocide games staged by the Chinese Communist Party. And what can we do?
Stand for freedom. Defund the dictators. When you see made in China,
Put it down.
Pretty straightforward, not pulling any punches. What did NBC say?
Yeah, NBC, well, we reserved the airtime. We made the ad together with Inez Cantor Freedom. And we wanted to call out these companies that are complicit in genocide and propping up this propaganda platform for the communist dictatorship in China. And NBC came back, their legal department, at the last moment and said, well, we'll run it. You just have to materially change this, that, and other things and take down all the company logos. So it was a non-rejection rejection. But, their censorship or attempt at it has actually shown a huge spotlight on it, and it's gone viral all over the world. And guys, our whole point was twofold. One, we want to call out this hypocrisy of all of these companies like Coca-Cola and Airbnb and Intel, Visa. They want to preach social justice. They want to contribute to these causes here in the United States. They want to boycott Georgia and Major League Baseball and virtue signal all over the place. But yet, when it comes to millions of Muslims being loaded into rail cars and sent off to concentration camps, forced abortions and sterilization for the women, the men are sent out to cotton fields and are harvesting sugar for Coca-Cola and Nike, yet they want to turn a blind eye to all of that. Not to mention unleashing COVID on the world, threatening Taiwan, stamping out freedom in Hong Kong, and a massive military buildup, right? So we're going to take the case to the American people. They are getting the message. NBC's ratings are in the tank for the Olympics, but the real theme of the whole thing is to the American people. When you see made in China, put it down. It's not just a human rights issue. It's a national security issue at this point, and of course, an American jobs issue.
Congressman, what should we have done? I agree with you. I think it's disgusting that we went to China and that we're actually having the Winter Olympics in Beijing. What was the right decision? What should we have done? Because obviously these athletes deserve the opportunity to compete, but I agree with you. I think a lot of people are tuning out of the Winter Olympics because of their disgust with our bowing down to China.
No, that's absolutely right. What should have happened is the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, should have moved the games. And we've been asking them to do that for years. They had ample time to do it. But when it came became clear that IOC was not going to do that. And that's a whole separate conversation, by the way. They get billions of dollars tax-free from these sponsors. We've introduced legislation to revoke their tax-free status. And there's a level of corruption there that needs to be fully exposed. Here nor there, I introduced a measure that we should have boycotted. And I support the athletes as well. It's the IOC that's forcing them to choose between their morals and values and being able to compete. But, at the end of the day, a lot of people point to the 1980 boycott and say, well, that wasn't successful. No, the correct analogy is actually apartheid in South Africa. And the IOC did take a principled stand then, said we're not going to have the Olympics in South Africa. Heck, they didn't even allow the South African athletes to compete anywhere in the world. And all of corporate America and the activists, athletes, and everyone else supported that. I think that's the appropriate analogy. They did that for 30 years and did affect change. And I think that's the approach we should be taking to this communist dictatorship that has the largest genocide going on right now since the Holocaust.
We're speaking to Congressman Michael Waltz of Florida, also former U.S. Army Special Forces. Congressman, what about the problem here that some would start to say, and this is not by no means is this something that should be an acceptable status quo, but I think we're all seeing that a lot of companies view China as too big to boycott, essentially, or too big to take major action against. How do we change that? I mean, the problem is they're going to keep looking at this, say, we're companies. We have a profit motive here. Now, they pretend, they'll go with wokeness, and they'll talk about how much they hate cops because, there'll be a Democrat moral panic around BLM or whatever. But
That's right.
on China, they're like, we need access to this market, and the Chinese will shut us down. So how do we shift the game here? How do we shift the table so that they aren't always just going to come back to, look, we agree with you guys, but we got a business to run?
Yeah, they got to make money, right? And I want them to make money. I built a business myself, and I'm a proud capitalist to a point. But when you have a dictatorship that is openly talking about replacing the United States as a world leader, that's openly talking about replacing the American dream with the China dream, and in the wake of COVID, which I think was a real wake-up call for the American people, on choking off our critical supply chains, mask gowns and gloves. They now control 90% of our pharmaceuticals, 90% of our rare earth minerals, 90% of our computer chips. If they end up taking Taiwan, that's unacceptable, and we cannot, from a national security standpoint, we cannot have that. Oh, by the way, their Navy is now larger than ours, than the U.S. Navy, and their Space Force is launching more into space than the rest of the world, including us combined. So, look, I want those jobs in America, that manufacturing in America, but if it can't be for a variety of good business reasons, how about Malaysia? How about India? That's a 1.4 billion person market you can sell into. How about if we incentivize them to make in Central America and you kill two birds with one stone, the migration issue, plus getting those supply chains out of our greatest adversary? But I think this is a case where we're going to have to force these corporate CEOs. But then again, I think the American people are getting the message. I had someone call me that was in a diner in North Florida. A patron asked the waitress to turn on the Olympics. And another waitress said, you know what, we don't support genocide here and we don't support China here. That was from a waitress in North Florida. So I do think the message is getting out and they want to talk about defunding police. Let's defund dictatorships, defund our greatest adversary. And again, when people see Made in China, put it down. It's human rights, it's jobs, and it's national security.
Congressman, you mentioned the situation in North Florida and that reaction inside of a diner. What's going to happen in the midterms based on what you're seeing in the state of Florida in 2022 and also in the governor's race there? How optimistic are you that Republicans are going to do well in your state?
Look, I think we're in great shape. People have been voting with their feet for 2 years and coming to the free state of Florida. Number one. Number two, for the first time in Florida's history, we now have more registered Republicans than we do Democrats. By comparison, in 2012, there were 700,000 more Democrats than Republicans. That's now flipped for the first time in our history. The governor is being proven right on everything from therapeutics to masks in schools, our tax treatment, our beaches. Look, I think we're in strong shape. But we can't ever take anything for granted. There's only two ways to run for office: unopposed and scared. And we're going to keep taking the message out. And by the way, from 2016 to 2020, we saw a shift to Republicans in every demographic group, in every Hispanic group, amongst African Americans, particularly African American women, over the school choice, amongst Jewish voters, for everything that President Trump has done, and Ron DeSantis and a Republican-led Congress has done for Israel. I'm very optimistic, and again, the biggest indicator is people voting with their feet, and they're coming into our great state at the rate of 1,000 a day.
Congressman, appreciate the time. Great ad. Thanks for spending the time with us and sharing that ad, and we'll look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Okay, we'll keep up the fight. Thanks, guys.
Bringing in now Jake Bequette. He is a former NFL player. He's been in the armed forces. He is running for the Senate in Arkansas. And, Jake, I'll start with this. I'm out in L.A. for the Super Bowl. Which side of the equation do you like here? Do you like the Rams? Do you like the Bengals? How would you assess the two teams here before we get into the political situation in Arkansas and beyond?
Well, first of all, I hope you brought your mask out west, Clay.
Unfortunately,
Jake, we're worried that there's like the old West, wanted posters out for the unvaxxed bandit known as Clay Travis. But anyway,
I love it. I love it. Yeah, burn that sucker. I'm going to go for the Bengals. Look, I haven't been. I've been a very outspoken critic of the NFL, but if you're going to force me to make a choice, I'll go with the Bengals. Go for the underdog. I think they are the team of destiny this year. I like Joe Burrow. It's good to see two former SEC quarterbacks getting after it. So I'll go for the Bengals.
Jake, now let's dive into the larger political environment. What are you hearing from people in Arkansas? I had a great time, great experience in Fayetteville, all over the state of Arkansas. We were there for the Arkansas-Texas game, I think the biggest crowd ever in Razorback Stadium there. I love being able to interact with football fans because it really feels like the heartbeat of America very often, particularly college football fans. What are you hearing from your potential constituents the most as you travel the state of Arkansas and run for the Senate there?
Well, first of all, it was great to have you in Fayetteville for that game. And, Arkansas just had a big basketball victory. We just knocked off number 1 Auburn.
I saw that. And a heck of a storming of the court scene there in Fayetteville over that win. That was a big one for Eric Musselman.
Absolutely. And that's where I was going. We've had two, we stormed the field after the UT game. We stormed the court after the Auburn victory. And I'm so proud of SEC country because we have been holding the line on this COVID tyranny from the beginning. Yep. I think we've led the charge. We've led the fight to restore some sanity to this country because you can't escape the images on TV. People around the country and, in Los Angeles and New York and D.C., they're seeing all these SEC stadiums fully packed. They're seeing students packed into the student sections, having a great time. You see them storming the field in Fayetteville at Razorback Stadium or at Bud Walton Arena. And it never made sense with these draconian lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccine passports that their reality was in those coastal liberal elite cities. So, look, in Arkansas, people are fed up. They're angry. They're ready to take our country back. That's part of the reason why I'm running for the U.S. Senate is because there really is a huge gap between the beating heart of the grassroots, the base of the Republican Party, and these establishment career politician rhinos who are in D.C., and part of the reason why I'm running is to close that gap.
We're speaking to Jake Bequette, former Army Ranger and former NFL player running for Senate in Arkansas. Jake, as you've seen, no doubt, some members of the military have been fired, have been kicked out for vaccine refusal. And that's coming right before, of course, we have a lot of vaccine mandate and mask mandate essentially suspensions going on, right? They're stopping, at least for a period of time, some of these programs in a lot of states, the blue states. You don't have to worry about this in Arkansas the same way. What do you think should be done for the folks? And if you were to be in the Senate, what would you like to see the federal government do for anyone who's been involuntarily separated from and or fired from the military for vaccine refusal?
Well, this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. I was recently a rifle platoon leader in the 101st Airborne Division. And look, some of the bravest and best soldiers that I ever served with are being forced out of the military. Some have already been fired due to these insane, tyrannical vaccine mandates. If I'm elected to the U.S. Senate, I will lead the fight to either restore these troops to active duty status with full back pay, or just give them the money in their retirement they are owed as if they were never fired. It's an absolutely ridiculous situation that we're in, that we are firing some of the most elite troops in this country, including Navy SEALs, Green Berets, some of the bravest Americans, some of our bravest fellow citizens who have sacrificed so much for this country, laid it all on the line. And look, just one story anecdotally. I know a good friend of mine is a Marine. He came home from Kabul, Afghanistan. He was part of that botched withdrawal in Afghanistan. The Biden administration just completely screwed up. And upon returning, after serving his country over in Afghanistan, he was forced to retire from the military because of the vaccine mandate. It's absolutely insane. I'm never going to stand for it. I salute some of the, one of the few brave U.S. senators, Ron Johnson, who has been, holding the administration accountable. He's, bringing some very interesting information to light. I'll leave it at that. And I think there's going to be a critical mass of new leaders in Washington who are going to expose the fraud and the absolute lies that the American people have been told. And our watchword has to be accountability. Accountability for Dr. Fauci, these unelected bureaucrats, and the corrupt politicians in both parties who have imposed this COVID tyranny upon America.
Jake, by the way, we're going to have Senator Ron Johnson on tomorrow with us. He's been a great guest on Clay and Buck, obviously running for re-election in the state of Wisconsin here coming up in November. You just mentioned Dr. Fauci. We've had Rand Paul on the show. Obviously, Rand is a doctor, and he has said that we should hold Dr. Fauci accountable. If you're elected to the Senate from Arkansas, and we're talking to Jake Bequette, former NFL player, former Arkansas Razorback, also a soldier, what would you consider accountability for Dr. Fauci to look like as a senator from Arkansas if you have the ability to be asking him questions?
Look, I think he should be held accountable. Look, he should first and foremost be brought before hearings in both the House and the Senate. I was among the first to sign the Michael Knowles pledge to hold Dr. Fauci accountable to, if elected, reduce his salary to zero. He should be paid nothing by the American taxpayer. And quite frankly, I think he belongs in prison. I think he should be liable to criminal prosecution for the lies he has told to the American people, for the untold damage that has been done to our country, the small businesses that have been shuttered, lives that have been shattered, young people who have been driven to drug abuse and societal disruption. It's totally insane that the children across this country, I think a story that hasn't been told enough is the complete collapse in achievement among standardized test scores across the country. Some of these left-leaning outlets have begun to let some of this information trickle out. But I think the last couple of years have been an absolute disaster for the progress, the intellectual and social development of so many young children across this country, and the consequences of which are going to reverberate for years to come. And so, as I said again, accountability is the watchword, and I think that includes possible imprisonment.
Jake, what's your site for folks who want to learn more about you and your race for the Senate in Arkansas?
So my website is jakebequette.com. That's JakeBequette, jakebequette.com. Join our movement. We have supporters from all 50 states, all 75 Arkansas counties. Look, this is a movement. It's not just in Arkansas. It's all over the country. They're starving for younger, bolder, more dynamic leaders who are going to be conservative warriors, not just Republicans who have an R next to their name. JakeBequette.com.
Jake, thanks so much. Great to have you.
Thanks, Buck. Thanks, Bud.
As promised, we've got Dr. Marty Makary with us now. He's Johns Hopkins University Medical Center and the author of The Price We Pay. Dr. Makary, great to have you back, sir.
Great to be with you.
So you've got some updates for us, as I understand, on the little something called natural immunity, which, despite what the CDC has led a lot of people to believe, is a real thing that really matters.
Well, the test of time has caught up with the deniers, and we did this giant study out of Johns Hopkins. My research team invited people in. We tested their blood. And what we found is that if you had COVID in the past, 99.3% of those people had circulating antibodies, and those antibodies were present almost 2 years after infection. So the debate is over. Now it's time to just recognize, are we really following the science or are we following politics? Because I hear about high-level meetings in the government among public health officials, and they're basically political meetings. Should we agree to this or not? And it's like, how about follow the data?
So what's going to happen now, Dr. Makary? Are we just going to go like all the people who were saying vaccine mandates, mask mandates, as they're all just disappearing? Are people just going to pretend that that never happened? I just don't know where we go from here, right? Like I'm in L.A., Buck's in New York City. There are places that are saying, hey, we have to see your vax card. Is it just going to disappear and then people are going to be like, yeah, well, that as if it never happened? Like in your mind, where does it go from here?
Well, people are angry. They're not willing to just say, you know what, you really screwed up society for 2 years. We're just going to forgive you and move on. People want honesty. They want some accountability. This was the biggest public health intervention in human history. You had a Johns Hopkins study come out 2 weeks ago evaluating the effect of that giant intervention. And basically, Fox and Wall Street Journal were the only places that covered it.
It's amazing.
And people are seeing through it.
Dr. Makary, when are we going to be able to get a sense? Do you think it is possible for us to get a sense of what the actual exposure to the American people of this virus was? I mean, I remember in the early days, there was serology testing being done to get a sense of just antibody levels in the general population. And in New York City alone, in June of 2020, if I recall correctly, 20% in June of 2020 of the city had already had COVID at that point in time. Do we have any way, and do you think we'll be able to get a sense as to how many people in this country have actually had COVID at this point? Because it strikes me as a very important part of the data to see whether any of this mitigation stuff, any of the lockdown strategies had really any effect at all.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It was 20% just a couple months into the pandemic of people in New York. And then it was 1 in 2 Americans by the end of the year, according to a Columbia University study after year 1. So, and the people who are unvaccinated, most of them have natural immunity. You know, what people don't realize is almost 90% of those truckers in Canada are vaccinated. And the ones that don't, I can almost guarantee you they've got natural immunity. So that's the reality. People are, they want to move on. They know the realities of the data.
Well, do you have any sense of what do you think is the percentage of the American people? Does anyone know, or can anyone do a study? I mean, do you think 80% of the country, 70% of the country has been infected? I mean, do we have any idea?
We don't. I think it's 90 to 95% have either vaccinated or natural immunity. Remember, when Omicron was ripping through the population, we were documenting 500,000 to 750,000 cases a day, and we're only capturing 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 cases. So we were adding almost 1% of our population, or half of 1% per day in that group that has natural immunity. There's very few people left. And when you talk about kids and, this rush to get every 6-month-old vaccinated, remember, they've all been exposed virtually, and it changes the calculus. They won't break down these studies that they put out by those who had the infection in the past. And that's why, if you remember, Denmark had this study nobody could explain that the unvaccinated had lower rates of transmission. Well, that's because they had more natural immunity.
Dr. Makary, what's going to happen in your mind with schools? What should happen? What will happen? Obviously, we just played a clip of Las Vegas school teacher announcing the kids don't have to wear masks anymore. There has been discussions, and some states have already said they're going to mandate it, like California, that kids have to all get the COVID vaccine. What do you think will happen? What should happen as it pertains to kids and COVID shots and masking going forward?
Well, I think most of the country is just saying, we're done. Look, we made tremendous sacrifices. We're not going to be playing these games about if you get vaccinated, then you can stay in school like they did with masks. They see through the phoniness of a lot of this stuff. They know that population immunity is high, and they know that healthy kids are virtually resilient to this severe illness. So I think people are just going to reject it all, except in the pockets of the country where you've got people like Sonia Sotomayor, who truly believed that 100,000 kids were in the hospital, and those politicians are going to try to cater to those people.
Speaking of Dr. Marty Makary, author of The Price We Pay and professor at Johns Hopkins University Medical Center. Dr. Makary, what is your assessment right now when someone says to you, mRNA technology in the fight against COVID? What do you want to say to them? I mean, I just kind of wonder here, what is the data really shown us in terms of, is it protective against infection from Omicron at all? Is it only protective against hospitalization and death? Do we have a sense as to at what level? That discussion has also fallen away as a lot of the mask mandates and some of the mania seems to be fading around it.
Well, I hope one of the takeaways is people, I hope, realize you cannot just believe what pharma is saying. And they can do some amazing things. There's good scientists there, and they develop good products. But when the messaging comes out, hey, we have a new variant, just take another dose of our vaccine that we invented for prior variants. And by the way, we're going to create another vaccine specific to Omicron, but just take another dose of what we have now until we come up with another one and then take that. I hope people see through this. I mean, the vaccine trial in kids 6 months through 5 years failed. It was a randomized control trial. It failed. There was no difference. And instead of saying, hey, let's scrap this and move on and try something different, what they did is they told the FDA, please approve this and just trust us. We'll get a third dose by the time this is out there, and that will help you. I think people are seeing through this right now. They want to move on. And it's not just this. It's all of it. It was the whole group think, surface transmission, the barbaric hospital visitation policies, school closings, the narrow dosing interval was too short, cloth masks, ignoring natural immunity, boosting kids, all of it. People are sick of all of it.
Dr. Makary, what would you tell parents? Because there still are parents who are listening to us that are trying to decide, because there's a lot of pressure being put on them, you know this, to go get their kids vaccinated for COVID. And this may turn into the next battle royale before all is said and done. I've been open. I think my kids have had COVID. I'm not anti-vax, but I'm not getting my young kids the COVID shot. I don't think they need it. I think they've likely had it, given that both myself and my wife have had it. What would you tell the average parent out there about their kids, especially young kids?
Well, I would tell them to follow the science, because in Pfizer's own vaccine trial in kids 5 through 11, it said that no kid who had COVID in the past got COVID. So regardless if they got the vaccine or not, they were immune. So if they have natural immunity, nobody should be getting a vaccine if they're young and healthy. For kids who have a comorbidity, I do believe in vaccinating those. Those are the high-risk kids, and those are the kids that benefit from the vaccine.
Dr. Makary, before I let you go, are we, by the summer, going to have to think about a lot of this stuff coming back, a lot of these debates coming back in November, December, or do you think enough of the medical community and just the American people in general have seen this for what it is? Not everybody, but enough that we're not going to have these battles again. Because I worry, I'm here in New York City, that come November, right after the elections, all of a sudden they're going to say, time to put those masks on, everybody, just in indoor settings, just for a while, maybe 2 masks, maybe get a booster. We're going to make you get a booster. We're going to fire you. I mean, I can see it all happening again. Do you think that's a concern we should have?
Yes. And I'll tell you, I saw the school debate coming last spring when the teachers' unions were saying, we're just going to get to the end of this year and then we'll be good for the fall, and we believe schools should be open in the fall. And I said, well, wait a minute, they're going to come up with new arguments. And you're going to see a bump in cases in the fall, guaranteed, just like we are with influenza and parainfluenza and rhinovirus and every other virus that circulates year to year. And some media outlet is going to report that we just had a 400% increase in COVID in this coming November, and that's going to be a headline, even though the cases went from 2 to 8 per 100,000. And there's high population immunity. So yes, I think we need to learn our lessons and prepare for a rational argument.
Dr. Marty Makary, author of The Price We Pay, Johns Hopkins University Medical Center. Dr. Makary, always illuminating, sir. Thanks for spending some time with us.
You've been honestly amazing. Like, I wish guys, like, instead of Fauci, which you talked about, Buck, like they're going to trot him out as if he's a hero. I wish a lot of the doctors like Dr. Makary, who actually took risk and spoke out on the data, we need to reward them too.
I don't even think the doc's on the line anymore. I mean, I would say,
I would say, I was
going to say, I would say Medal of Freedom. Like, I love these guys. I think the guys who took the difficult stances that turned out to be right, they need to be celebrated and lionized in this
bravery
country.
And courage, no doubt. We are joined now by Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Senator Aaron Rodgers won the MVP last night. I don't know if you saw that in your state. And I did notice this, and it got almost no attention. After all the anti-vax negativity that he took for not getting the COVID vaccine, he was sitting in a crowded L.A. arena, went up on the stage, accepted the award, and I didn't see a single media member complaining about it. I just thought that was kind of an interesting trajectory there. I don't know if you saw any of that, but L.A. seems to have, now that the Oscars are going to be allowed to happen without COVID vaccine required, no masks. I mean, everything is falling apart now in the COVID narrative, isn't it?
I think so. And listen, Aaron Rodgers is an MVP. He deserves it for playing football, but also for defending his personal health autonomy, for defending freedom, and pushing back against the assaults and the attacks and the vilification they had put up with. They didn't back down. I really appreciate that about him.
What's the latest from your perspective that you are hearing and seeing? We love to talk with you because you are one of the few actual politicians who has looked at the data. Have you been surprised by how quickly all these Democratic governors are suddenly this week ending mask mandates and ending many of their COVID restrictions? And they're claiming the science changed. But do you think it's just finally the poll numbers have gotten so bad that they recognize that they're going towards a disaster and they had to change something?
Well, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, they politicized COVID from the start, and they'll be politicizing it all the way through the end. You know, I personally think the greatest sin perpetrated by the COVID gods, you know, I actually heard somebody start calling the COVID cartel. I think that's maybe a better description.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the health agencies, you know, big pharma, the news media, the big tech social media giants. I think the greatest sin was in sabotaging early treatment. 900,000 people died. They didn't all have to die. But then also not exercising caution when it came to the vaccines, not watching their own safety surveillance systems. You know, I just got my update on my chart from VAERS, 1.1 million adverse events, 23,615 deaths reported on VAERS associated with COVID vaccines. And I know that doesn't prove causation, but 30% of those deaths, that's holding pretty solid, occur on day 0, 1, or 2. It certainly concerns me. I don't know for the life of me why it hasn't concerned Fauci and Collins and Walensky, Dr. Woodcock, Dr. Marks. I mean, I think the thing that will be lingering will be the vaccine injured. They need acknowledgement, by the way, because as long as the CDC won't admit that the vaccine could be associated with some of their harms, doctors won't treat them. They just treat them like they're mentally ill or something. This is a travesty. What is happening, what has happened, and anybody that would look at $900,000 900,000 deaths, the human toll, the economic devastation, what we've done to our children. I saw that video. It was joyous. I love to see their smiles. What did we do to our children? So anybody who would take a look at our response to COVID and call that a success is out of his mind. It's been a miserable failure, and they need to be held accountable for it.
Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin with us now. Senator, totally agree with you on that. I'm not, as a New Yorker who's been put through a lot of the madness of Fauciism, really a concentration of lunatic, maniacal Fauciite policies here. I'm not willing to just move past it. I want to know what you think of the Canadian Freedom Convoy and also the continued chatter in this country about a similar protest movement of truckers standing up, not just about vaccine mandates, for basic freedom in the era of COVID.
I love it. They're standing up and they're fighting for freedom. They're doing it peacefully. My wife said that people were complaining they were honking their horns. they stopped honking their horns. They're making a point. And it's a point that, again, the COVID cartel, the legacy media, the big tech social media giants, they won't let it be made. So we've got to make it on the streets. But, the people fighting for freedom are doing it peacefully. They're doing it respectfully. And God bless them for doing it. I hope we see more of that here in the United States, quite honestly.
Senator Johnson, I appreciate you running for re-election. I know we've mentioned that before, but just want to reemphasize that we're number one in the Milwaukee market, and I want people to come out and make sure they support you because you've been willing to fight battles that, frankly, a lot of politicians have run and hid from, and we needed more voices like yours instead of fewer. What should happen? Let's presume that you and the Republicans are able to take back the Senate and take back the House. What should happen to Dr. Fauci and all of the people who have enabled him from your perspective? Is it a 9/11 style true commission? Is it an investigation really in depth into Fauci and the NIH and all of the gain of function research? What would you, if you are a part of a majority in the Senate, want to do as you began 2023?
Expose the truth. And I've spoken with Senator Paul. I've spoken with Jim Jordan. It's what we are trying to do right now, but we're being blocked. I've asked for all the emails that were granted under FOIA requests, but all fully redacted. So we took about 400 pages of the 4,000 and said, we want these unredacted. They're letting us review them in camera about 50 at a time. It's taken us 6 months. We're down to the last 50 pages, and they won't show us that. What's under that? So we need to expose the truth, but the solution has to be we need to install doctors at the top of the healthcare pyramid again. Right now, they're at the bottom. We've got our healthcare system completely backwards right now. Right now, it's the COVID gods, the cartel that's reigning supreme, the pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare agencies, then the hospital associations, the medical journals. We need doctors to take the Hippocratic Oath, whose loyalty is to patients. They have to be at the top. They have to be allowed to practice medicine, to be able to use their full off-label prescription rights without being harassed, without their license being threatened or taken away. What has happened is a travesty, and people have to recognize this. 900,000 people, not all those people had to die. They wouldn't have had we embraced, thoroughly explored early treatment. There's literally a cornucopia of cheap, generic, repurposed drugs widely available. It could have been used. They are being used successfully. It could have been used in a widespread fashion. Hundreds of thousands of people, I believe, would be alive today had the COVID cartel not blocked early treatment. And they're still blocking it. We're still going to need early treatment. This isn't something that's going away.
Senator Johnson, for people out there who may not understand how much difference there is between being in the majority and being able to hold Fauci accountable and not being in the majority, how much of a difference would it have made the last couple of years if Republicans had been in control all the time? And how much difference will it make for you in January of 2023 compared to what you can do now? How seismic is that change?
Well, I think it's pretty significant. Obviously, I would have held official Senate hearings as opposed to the events that I'm holding anyway. By the way, my event on January 24th, the COVID-19 A Second Opinion, over 2 million views on Rumble. That's the full 5-hour event. We have a 38-minute highlight reel that I put up on YouTube. Honestly, just seeing how long it takes them to remove it. They haven't yet. So 1.2 million views on that. So if you don't have 5 hours, at least go to YouTube and watch the 38-minute highlight reel. It will open your eyes. These are eminently qualified individuals. They are rational. And by the way, if you're going to get even a first opinion, wouldn't you rather go to doctors who actually have the courage and compassion to treat patients as opposed to these knuckleheads that have mismanaged COVID in the ivory towers in their little bureaucratic offices? I mean, this is insane who we've listened to. Well, I don't know why anybody would keep listening to Fauci and Walensky and Woodcock at this point in time. 900,000 deaths, what we've done to our children. So, no, it's about exposing the truth. It's about holding people accountable. But then it's about reestablishing and putting doctors back on top of the medical establishment pyramid. They have to be in charge.
Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Sir, we always appreciate you coming by, Clay and Buck. Thanks so much.
Stay well.
We're now joined by our friend Will Cain, host of Fox and Friends Weekend and the Will Cain podcast. He's also got a special on Fox Nation coming out next week called Long Drive Back, Tiger Woods and Ben Hogan. Will, buddy, good to have you.
Buck, Clay, what's up, guys?
We're good, man. So we spent a lot of time today talking about the pivot, the big shift right now, away from mask up between bites outside in the cold, or make the kids do that at least, to maybe it's time to think about life somewhat normal going forward. What do you think is going on here?
I can only assume it's rats jumping off of the ship, seeing that the ship is sinking. I can only assume it has to do with absolutely abysmal polling numbers and the potential bloodbath at the polls. That being said, whatever is motivating this regime, that's probably the right word to use, regime, not political party, but absolutely power-based regime. Whatever is motivating them, I happen to find myself in this unforgiving attitude. Another friend of the three of ours, Jesse Kelly, has given great voice to this. And I be real with both of you guys. I struggle because I want to be a person of forgiveness. I want to be a positive person and ready to move forward. But I do believe we can't move forward without some accountability. I am not afraid. I am certain the Hakeem Jeffries of the world will move forward trying to convince everyone that their policies, that Joe Biden delivered us from COVID, and they will spend zero time on reflection, and they will pretend they did not mask our children for 2 years. They did not lock down our businesses for significant periods of time, and they did not instill fear in the population at large. And I just simply can't forgive and forget the last 2 years.
Amen. Will, I mean, and that's why my argument is for everybody out there listening right now, as much anger and vitriol as you feel right now, don't allow it to fade between now and November, right? November needs to be a consequential election where the people who made these awful decisions regarding COVID pay political consequences for those choices. Otherwise, what is the point of an election if you don't hold politicians accountable for what I think is the biggest public policy failure since Vietnam? For most of us out there, certainly those of us who are relatively young, and I'm using young expansively, well, there's never been anything that is this poorly run in any of our lives in America.
Clay, and I would go a step further. I don't think the reckoning is only at the ballot box. And I'm not talking about tribunals or public trials, but I am talking about the total and utter destruction of credibility. You say one of the biggest public policy blunders of our time. I would add to that one of the biggest propaganda drives in my lifetime, and I would suggest probably at least in a half a century. And so what we have seen is the perpetuation of, you want to talk about the big lie? How about the multitude of lies that people like Dr. Anthony Fauci and on down to mayors across this country have perpetuated on the American people with significant long-term cost, most notably on our kids. But when this is done, Clay, Buck, when the rats have jumped off the ship, there will be some sad souls left like zombies shuffling around. These are beyond the authoritarian power grabbers. This is beyond the virtue signalers. This is the true sad cost of those who have internalized the fear. You may know some, I know some. These are the people who actually aren't cynical, who are sadly now mentally destroyed. And they will walk around in fear of something they can't see for the rest of their lives.
We're speaking of Will Cain, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend and host of the Will Cain podcast, which is very excellent. I was just a guest on it recently, so you should all go check out Will's podcast. Will, to me, I do wonder. I mean, you and I both. Clay has some time at CNN, a little different. His
very short-lived CNN.
You and I though both spent some time over there, and with Zucker's ouster, I just have to wonder if, given now that all this stuff is really what I would just call the edifice of Fauciism is just crumbling all around us in real time. Anyone who's paying attention can see it. Do you think that there'll be some people who will not only reflect, internally, but will publicly begin to say, wow, we actually, whether it's CNN or the New York Times or anywhere else, we called for the abuse of children and for the trampling of the Constitution and for the destruction of people's mental health with little, if any, attendant benefit to their health. Do you think we might see some shift? I mean, at some point, is it so ugly and so immoral what's been done that even CNN will have some people say, yeah, we shouldn't do that again?
No. not in a moment of self-reflection. Can I say just for one moment, the last thing Clay needs is any more ego boost. But I remember a little bit like everyone in an older generation than us can remember where they were when JFK was assassinated. I can remember where I was when Clay said he loved the First Amendment and boobs on CNN. I was in Las Vegas, Nevada, covering a boxing match for First Take on ESPN. I was set to go debate Stephen A. on Golovkin versus Alvarez, I think it was. And Clay lit the internet on fire by saying the word boobs on CNN. And I didn't know Clay at the time, but I knew that I would one day. and Buck, to your point, and by the way, I would say you need to go check out the Will Cain podcast. Buck was excellent on it. If you want to know more about who Buck is as an individual, a human being, a person, and where we both have come together, go check that out. And so Buck and Clay, you both know this. There won't be self-reflection. Don Lemon will never look in the mirror and say, did I get this wrong? That will not happen. But Buck, there will be a different form of accountability. I think most specifically at CNN. I think we're probably within 12 months of a total house cleaning at CNN.
Fantastic.
All right. This is going to be a hell of a pivot. It's almost as big of a pivot as we've seen the blue states making as it pertains to masks. Leaving aside the greatest public policy failure of any of our lives, Sunday's the football Super Bowl game going on, Will. I am on the Rams as a 4-point favorite. I think they win by double digit. I like the under in this game. I like Aaron Donald to be MVP. Buck has no idea about any of that I just said. No idea.
Zero.
Will, what do you expect to see in the Super Bowl come Sunday?
It's going to be boring. Look, I don't know if they teach us to think the same way at Vanderbilt, University of Texas Law. I don't know how we have ended up on the same side of so many issues, Travis, but I'm on the Rams. I'm on the Rams to cover. I'm going to place a nice little bet on Aaron Donald as your MVP. I think I get plus 1,200 right now. And yep. I'm gonna hedge that with a little bit of Cooper Kupp MVP. You know, and that's, by the way, Clay, I think those are the most interesting bets, the most fun bets. And
I agree. Those are the three, and people can understand those. By the way, we're going to do a prop bet with Buck. I love prop bets, but Buck, I had Dub pull non-sports prop bets for you to be able to go head-to-head against me without needing any football knowledge, so you can have Super Bowl stakes games here. We're going to do that coming back in a break. But those are the three I agree, Will, because everybody can kind of have an opinion, and they aren't overwhelming to make.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. In order to win MVP, what do you have to be? You either have to be a quarterback or you have to be famous. And Aaron Donald is just famous enough. And so is Cooper Kupp. Because the odds-on favorite, if you and I are right that the Rams win, then the odds-on favorite is Matt Stafford wins MVP. But you don't make any money picking the odds-on favorite. So take your long shots, take Aaron Donald, take Cooper Kupp.
I mean, you guys might as well be speaking in Chinese for all I can pick up from all this. But anyway, I'm glad that everyone out there, I'm glad the rest of America knows what you're talking about, because I have no idea. Everyone check out the Will Cain podcast, and obviously tune in this weekend to Fox and Friends. It's amazing. We got Will Cain, our friend Pete Hegseth. We got a great squad.
Rachel's great too. You guys have a fantastic show.
Great stuff there.
And by the way, on Saturday morning, President Donald Trump.
Wow.
Oh, wow. That's a hell of a tease. That's a big timer.
Well done. Will, our friend, we'll talk to you soon, buddy. Thanks for being with us.
Right. Thanks, guys.